Okay. All right. So we're at our spoon. So this is one that I have worked on. The rounded, the oval area here has a lot more work than this. I figured this is really what I need to be showing you. So the colors that I used in here are a mix of a dark brown, blue, red, and a little bit of green. What you can also do is you can use, if you have a Payne's gray, I did not use any gray on this. I kind of opted to mix the colors, but you can do it either way. So what I'm going to show you is really the strength of colors that you should be working with. So when you're kind of starting to build it, it really should not be any darker than this, okay? So this is where your midtones need to be, your highlights, and this is where your dark areas are going to be. So you don't want to go as dark as we did here. So if you put them side by side, you can see, well, can't do it side by side. You can see that I'm darkening as I go ahead. You don't want to do it from the very beginning, because what happens when you're painting and you're looking at something and you're trying to interpret that is that it actually takes your eye a while to adjust and start seeing details. That's just the process. We don't see everything at once. The more you work on it, you start seeing more shapes. So you want to give yourselves a lot of room to get the tones right and get them exactly where they need to be, where they end, where they get stronger. So like I was saying, what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of block out areas of different color, and we are going to work wet on each kind of area, because what we see in our reference is that the color seems to range in the spoon, especially in the oval area. Now I lost my visual. So what we're going to do is we're going to work on it one piece kind of at a time, just to make sure that we're having all sorts of tech issues today. Okay. Okay, I'm just getting my image back. Okay, so the first thing, of course, we need to do is we need to look at the shape and the size. It's fairly simple. The most important thing is you want to get the ratio right of the spoon part, the oval part, and then the handle. So as I'm looking at it, it seems like this is 1/3 of the entire length of it. So an easy way to do that would be to kind of just mark, just take a really light color, and you can kind of do thirds, like this is where the top is going to be. And then, so this is our bottom, and just divide this into 3 parts. So you're going to have the handle, and then you're going to have the beginning of the oval. Let me just lift that up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I am going to just show you a little bit of color mixing here, just for us to get our colors right the way we want them for this. So like I was telling you, I mixed a bunch of different colors to get those different grays. When you're painting something that is gray, or I mean silver or gold, you know, try to identify what is it leaning towards. You know, is it leaning more towards a blue, a green? On this one, I thought this was really cool because it has almost like these pink and red and brown reflections in it. So I'm gonna try to create a color that is just an overall color for the metal, for the dark part of the metal. So I'm going to take a dark brown over here. So I'm going to place this in here so you can kind of see. So you can see this is very brown, and look at how it changes when I put a little bit of purple. See how it's starting to change? I'm going to put a little bit of blue. You can see how it's starting to change. This is getting very close to certain colors. I sometimes get really excited when I'm mixing a color and another color starts emerging. It's like, oh, okay, so I'll use that later. So let's try this and just see kind of what we have over here. So we're getting kind of a brownish gray. Now for the areas that I want a little bit more coolness, I'm going to add a little bit of blue. You can see I'm getting more of a steel kind of gray here. And for the areas that have a little bit of red, I'm just going to take a deep red. And you can see what I'm getting here. So I did all of these without even using any of this paint gray, which I will show you. Some of the sets have. So that's a paint gray, which kind of, excuse me, has a little bit of blue in it. In some areas, I think could use a little bit of green. So I'm just going to take a dark green and add it to the mix. And you can see I'm getting another. So again, there's no exact formula for this. You kind of have to go with what's in your sets. And also you have to trust your eye. If it looks too brown, try to cool it down with a little bit of blue, try a little bit of green, and just try to get that right. So I want to give you just a couple minutes to kind of do that and just experiment kind of like I did here. And again, you know, if your mix is dark, that's fine. But when you start applying it to your paper, you want to make sure that you are watering it down. So always remember, it's the consistency of very weak tea. That's kind of what we are going for. And since you're doing an elongated subject, you want to make sure that you're using your paper in vertical format. So you can unmute yourself if you have any questions before we start. If you have any questions about getting the color right, you can unmute yourself. If you have any questions.
Can you tell us what brush you're going to use for the hollow part?
For the
yes.
oval part?
Yes. What brush?
It depends on which stage. I will show you as we go along. I was wondering if anyone had any questions about the color. Lisa?
Yeah, when you're doing yours, will you just mention if you're using your, I'm using Payne's Gray, so I'm adding like a little red to it or a little green to it. Can you just, when you're doing yours, just say which one you're using, if you're using, you know, like
yes,
a little red to it?
Yeah. I try as most as my brain can remember while we're doing it. Yes. Any other questions? Okay, so let's start. So what I'm going to do for starting it, like I showed you earlier, I'm basically going to be drawing this with watercolor. You can do this part with pencil if you want. I like to do it with watercolor because I feel that it just blends in a lot better with everything, and then I don't have to erase it. So what we're going to do is, like that gray that you made, you want a very diluted version of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start just putting down the parts. So I put my 3 dots. And I'm starting with the oval. Let me just mute. I think I was mute there for a minute. Okay. And as it goes higher up, it's going to get a little bit wider. So I like to work on one side and then go to the other side and just kind of feather it. I wouldn't do like a strong continuous line. I do think this can go a little bit longer. Okay, so I have the outline of my spoon. So what I'm going to do next is I'm still using a watered down version, is I'm going to start kind of going into all these different shapes that I'm seeing that create highlights and shadows. And I'm just going to kind of draw them out. So the reason I'm doing this is that I have some areas that I need to leave white, and I want to make sure that I don't just go over them. And it's also going to help me kind of decide on each shape is going to have a certain hue to it, because we have the silvers kind of going into blue, going into reds, going into browns. So just wherever, you know, just kind of let your hand be guided by your eye, and just wherever you're seeing any separations, just kind of put them down. It's going to look kind of like, you know, like a puzzle piece. But especially you want to be careful with your main highlights, which is this one over here. It's kind of got a little bit of a split. And then there's a kind of big, strong one down here. There's a smaller one next to it. And there's one here, which we have. And there's a little one next to it. And what I would like you to do is, as we work continuously, you know, just check the shape and make sure that it's not going off sync. Okay, we can do a little bit up here. And this, the handle has a slightly different, it's more muted. So it's not having, because it's not having any, you know, real continuous surfaces. So what I'm doing is I'm just kind of giving this a little bit more shape. And I'm just putting in the main kind of sections that I'm seeing. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify the really dark areas. So we're going to go to that gray that we've created. I'm going to create one again so we can see it together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the darkest brown in your kit, in your set. So I'm going to go right here. So again, this is a deep brown. I'm going to take a blue, any blue will do. Okay, so you can see the minute I put the blue, it kind of turned it into a less, into a cooler version. I'm gonna take a little bit of purple. I feel the color is still looking brown. So I'm gonna go back and put a little bit more blue. And I think now it's giving me that deep gray almost. If you want to use Payne's gray, you can use it, but I'm choosing not to use it for this one. And I know many of you still don't have that color. So what I'm going to do is I'm looking at where my darkest areas are. I can see some in the handle, around the spoon, and especially in the left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a slightly bigger brush and I am going to wet this left side here, kind of where I'm seeing that really dark color. So we're going to do a little bit of wet on wet, and then I'm going to take that gray color and I'm just going to drop it in. See, let it play around. And you can extend it a little bit. Now, as you go to the right, it's getting lighter. So I would just take a little bit of water and just kind of spread it. So the darkness stays to the left side. I think I have a little bit too much water, so I'm just gonna pick up some of it, mop it up. Okay, and we're gonna let that dry a little bit. So now we're going to go to the handle. I need to be a little bit more precise with the handle, so I'm just making more of that same color. Oops, too blue. Just right. And I'm going to just start putting it. I'm not doing wet on wet in the handle because they're kind of small areas. I think they wouldn't really benefit from the wet on wet. So I'm putting in that really dark color. And I'm putting it in wherever I'm seeing it. It's going to be around kind of the shapes. That are going to help define the designs that are in here. And then I see a line going this way. There's a little one over here. So notice that I did this darker than what I did here. And it's because this is an area that's just doesn't have any gradation of tone like this one does over here. So while this is still wet, I'm going to go in and I'm going to add a little bit more of that deep gray color that I created. If you need more, I'm working on kind of a large one, so you might not need to. And while it's still wet, I'm just gonna very carefully work it in the left side. And because I already put a wash down, or I with the wet on wet, they're kind of blending in nicely. So, you know, everything is kind of diffusing. It's not like a harsh transition. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to the right side where I'm seeing more blues. So I'm actually gonna go back to that gray color, but I'm gonna just amp it up a little bit with some blue. And so now I'm getting more of a blue color. And what I'm going to do is I am going to that up. I'm going to wet this area. And see, the thing is, I mean, we're working in almost a single palette, which is really just gray. So if you accidentally, you know, go into the brown area or the red area, it's going to be fine. But we want kind of the specific areas that are leaning more blue to have a little bit more of that color. Okay, so I'm going to drop in that blue gray. And then if you need to go into really small areas, you don't have to wet them. You can just go ahead. So I'm seeing some of it in here. A little bit up here. And since you already have that color, you can just kind of tuck it in wherever you're seeing it on the handle. I'm seeing much more of it down here. And actually, this is kind of like a good color to use for the background if you decide to do a background. Okay, so next I'm going to go into the reds and the pinks. And I feel that they're kind of like coming out of a brown area. So I'm gonna take a little bit of brown. And then I'm gonna take a little bit of a kind of a deep red. If you just have one red, just any red. And I'm not mixing them, I'm just kind of just having them just against each other. And as always, when you're going to work on an area, just try to go a little bit before the area. So I'm just going to start bringing in the brown gradually. So I'm going to go back to that gray that I did, and I'm going to take a little bit of brown and add it to it. So I'm going to start just kind of framing that area here that's going to have the reds, just so that it suddenly is not going to red. It might be too severe. So again, you know, with creating metal effects and shiny effects, it's all about the transitions. So again, I went back to where I had my initial grays. I went back to that gray on my palette. I put a touch of brown to it and just kind of dragged it around. And now I'm going into the area that has the reds. So now when I put in the red, it's not going to be that sudden. So I'm going to just wet that area a little bit. And I'm going to take some of that red and I'm going to drop it in. In some areas, it's looking a little bit more orange, so you can take a little bit of orange. I think that's a little too intense. I'm going to pick pick up some of it. Okay, and then see where else you're seeing that color in small doses. So we're seeing more of the reds and the browns over here. So I am, again, I'm going to go back to my gray. I think I need to make a little bit more. Again, brown, blue, purple. Mix them together until the color looks right to you. It should look like a gray. It shouldn't look like a purple. It shouldn't look like a brown. So anything that it's leaning more towards, that means that you need to use one of the other colors. So if your gray looks too brown, go with a little bit of blue. It'll tone it down. And, you know, color mixing is something that comes with practice. And I had a little bit of green here that's mixing in. So I'm going to have to go back and redo it a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to work on these areas here. So I'm going to take a little bit of brown and just add it to my gray. And I'm going to go in and just kind of start building up my red areas. So now when I put in my red, I'm not doing wet on wet here because they're really small areas, so it's not going to really make a difference. And again, this is really an opportunity to have some very happy mistakes with color. I'm going to put some of the red browns I'm seeing up here. Okay, so I'm going to just group these colors here in the middle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just taking some water and I'm just pulling in the colors kind of that are in there. Because this kind of seems to be the point where everything is kind of all the colors are meeting. We see the reds, we're seeing the oranges, we're seeing the blue. And then I'm just gonna kind of go around the whole spoon. And again, this is helping to get the shape a little bit better. I did have a little part over here kind of sneak out. So I'm just gonna just soften that a little bit. Okay, so I'm gonna let this kind of dry up a little bit and we're gonna work a little bit on the handle. So I'm gonna start softening the effect here. It's almost, we have like a blurred highlight, and I'm going back to my gray and I am going to just make it a little bit more brown. So I'm gonna take a little bit of brown and just add it to it. And I'm going to start just working down and connecting to the oval. Doing the same thing on the other side. So I'm moving up. And I'm starting to just kind of put in some of the shapes that I'm seeing. So I'm bringing them close together, but I'm still trying to maintain, keep those highlights that we're seeing in there, which are not quite white. So I'm going to go over them once this dries a little bit and just soften the effect of them. And again, you know, with the pattern, you want to give, you know, an impression of the pattern. You don't have to paint every single little detail that's in there. But we're definitely not having the very strong highlights that we do in the bottom part because we don't have a continuous area of high polish. Surface is kind of more broken down. And again, as you're working, if the grays start looking bluer, greener, purpley, reddish, just add whatever color you're starting to see. I think I'm going to add a little bit of blue to mine. A little bit of purple. And I'm slowly building. So of course, as you do the details, just make sure that you're constantly checking, you know, both sides. Make sure that you're not lopsided. And also, you know, you want to vary how much water you're using on those details. Notice there's some areas that the detail is very blurred. What is most pronounced is kind of what's in the middle because it seems to have like almost like a domed effect. Okay, so this actually would be a great time to work on the background. So if you're painting something and you're waiting for areas to dry, that's a great time to put in the background. I'm just going to put in a little bit just to kind of show you what I've done with it. So I'm definitely going to use wet on wet. Just try to make sure that you leave a little bit of space, you know, or just don't go over the spoon itself. And it seems in this background, there's quite a bit of blue almost. And I think it's really going to show off those pink and red reflections that are in there. So I'm just wetting the paper. And again, you know, the blue is a gray blue. So you want to kind of do the same thing and just add more blue. And sometimes, you know, just kind of look, try to, you know, have a good light source and just, you know, kind of just move your head to the side and just make sure that all the areas that you want to be wet are wet. If you have any big puddles, just take your brush and mop it up. And this is a great brush for, you know, things like backgrounds and quick spreading. It won't hold a lot of water, but it'll spread really quickly. If you want to something that holds water, you need more of like a mop brush that is round all around. This is a flat brush, and you see it's pinched. Okay, so I'm going to go to my gray. I'm going to take a little bit of blue. And I'm just going to start dropping it in. And when you're working on background, even with wet on wet, I mean, we live in very warm climate. So just make sure that you kind of, you know, you want to work on it in one go, because you don't want to have seams. So what you can do is you can put like your first coat and then go back and detail that later. But the idea is that you want to have even paint all around before it dries. So while this is wet, I'm going to, actually, I'm going to take Payne's Gray just to make it this a little bit faster. And I just mixed it with whatever was left of that color. And I'm just going to just put in that shadow that we're seeing, the cast shadow from the spoon. So again, I'm using a gray, or you can use a darker version of what you were doing. And it's not a very strong shadow. And then it kind of seems to just kind of feather it out a little bit so it's not too strong. And just kind of blend the edges into your background. And if it needs to be more pronounced, you can do that a little bit later. Okay, I do have a very strong light coming in. Okay, it's coming in from here. Very sunny day today. Okay, much better. Okay, so I think now, so you can really see how the metal effect is starting to show. Okay, so now I think we can go back and work on the spoon. So one of the first things I want to do over here is I want to get that highlight that is around the rim. So what I'm going to do is I am going to darken. I'm going to go back to a very dark gray of whatever method you've used. And I'm just going to go in And with a very thin brush, just kind of start deepening the edge over here. And also that way you can kind of tidy up the shape. And again, when you're using a thin brush, it's not going to hold a lot of paint. So I'm just being careful. I don't want to go into the wet background. And sometimes if you're in a hurry for, you want something to dry, you can just take a hair dryer and dry the area. Okay, so that's the first step. So this is somewhat dry. So my next step is I'm going to leave a little bit of space and I'm going to put another line that is a little bit lighter. I'm going to go up from over here. So that gap that I'm leaving is going to show that highlight. And then it's a little bit deeper here. Again, the thinnest brush you can find. Okay, so you can see we're getting the effect of that highlight. And if you need to go in and go a little bit deeper with the color, you can also do that. Okay. Now on this side, okay, this is still a little bit wet, but I think we can start. As I guide myself to this area, I'm going to go inside here and start adding more detail. So I think that this area here can still use a little bit more dark. And it seems to extend.
Noelle, can you push the camera down so we can see the bottom of the spoon? Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, and so I'm just going back in and I'm putting in kind of the darker areas. It's a little dark here. And see, because I already have so much color underneath, everything that I'm adding is enhancing. It's not, if you do this like directly onto white paper, the effect might be a little bit, too sharp. Okay, this one should be muted. So now I'm starting to work a little bit on the edge of the spoon over here, a little bit drier. Go back to a thinner brush. Okay, so now I'm going in the spoon, and I'm also gonna go outside the spoon. So I'm inside the spoon, and then a little bit outside. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bridge this color a little bit. I'm going to go back to the gray, add a touch of brown to it. And I'm just going to move it in. Just felt that that area was a little too light. I'm going to add a touch of red to this, because now I'm starting to see more reds. It's amazing, like after you start working for a while, the colors almost intensify. It's like at first you wouldn't have seen that many colors, and then as you start working, suddenly all the colors seem to come to life. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take just water, and I am going to go over the handle. So the areas that were not painted are going to have a highlight. Any areas that are painted are going to blend in just a little bit more nicely. So just go with an easy hand, don't go too heavy. I'm just going to take some water and just go just down the middle. And just get more of that highlight. Also, if you need to pick up some of the color, I'm going to take just a small piece of tissue here. I'm going to roll it up, and I'm just going to place it down the center. Okay. All right, really starting to look like metal. I'm going to start looking a little bit more for some of the more red areas and pink areas. Seeing more of it in here. Wherever you're seeing it more intensely now that you've been working on it for a while, you can start putting it in. And see, it's really helpful to work gradually. Because when you have more elements down, it's easier to see how everything is connecting. Because sometimes you might need more or less of a color than you initially thought when you see it next to something. So what I'm doing is I'm just going back and kind of looking at more of the details. And I feel that around this side of the spoon that you can go really dark. I mean, you could even use a little bit of black. So I do have a little bit of black here. And just use it at the very edge. And don't make a continuous line. Keep it feathered so that it doesn't look too harsh. I think I could put a little bit of it here. Okay, that's enough of the black. So I'm just going kind of visiting around the areas just to see what needs to be more pronounced, what needs to be softened. And you can almost do this with just like a single, you know, with just the gray color. I mean, you don't have to add, I feel like this just needs just a little bit more shading. And I'm definitely starting to see kind of almost more orange up here. And I'm gonna let it blend in with the rest. And I think this here needs to be a little bit more muted. Yeah, this highlight seems to have quite a bit of orange on it. So I'm just going to take orange with some water and just almost frame it. And then I'm starting to see more vibrancy down here. And while I'm doing that, I'm just going to go on the top, just where I'm seeing more of the reds and oranges. And again, I'm going to go back to a little bit of black. I'm just going to put it in the very few dark areas that I'm seeing. And of course, you know, the use of black and how much, it just depends on how dark or light your piece is. If you ended up being very dark, then you can go ahead and be a little bit more free with adding the black. And you could also use a really dark gray. But just make sure that you don't use it as an outline and that you don't make it a continuous line, because then what happens, a black line is very, it really sticks out, and what's going to happen is that all the details that you've done are going to disappear. So that pretty much, I mean, this would probably, if I had more time, I would kind of go in here. I think this here has a little bit, it's just, you know, a matter of getting the shades to be more gradual, and just adding the detail that they need. But again, you know, the most important part with doing this is to make sure that when you start, is that you start light enough, and when you darken, that you also do it in stages. So I would say this area over here, we probably went over, you know, at least 3 times to get that shade right. So, and again, you can also work a little bit in the background to kind of seeing almost some reds popping up here. That will really enhance the colors and the work. And again, because I already have a background, whatever I'm adding is not, you know, it's not sticking out too much. Okay, so let's see how everyone is doing. Okay, so you can unmute yourselves. So how did we do? Looks good, Lisa? Nice, Phyllis. Yeah. Edith? Can you just move it a little bit?
What? Oh, we can't see it.
So what do we think? Was this harder or easier? Susanna, what do you think?
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. You know, I think it's hard because we know that the actual color is silver and we're trying to build that color. But I think that once you get the grades right, I think it becomes easier, because what happens in the beginning, that looks good, Lucia. What happens when you're first starting to do these effects is that your color is going to look too blue or too green or too something. And I think until you get that magic formula, it'll start getting better. But also, you know, the detailing needs to happen very gradual. I mean, I feel like I need 2 hours at least just to demonstrate the breakdown. I mean, I feel this still has a very long way to go. Oh, that looks good, Sharon. That looks good. Does anyone have any questions or? Okay. So.
I have a
it would be-
technical, Noelle, I have a
Yeah.
technical kind of question.
Absolutely.
So I didn't end up leaving much white on my spoon part.
Yeah.
What can I do? What can I do about that?
Well, I mean, needless to say, it's best to prevent that from happening.
Right. I mean, is there?
But it does happen. It does happen. So so what you can do is you can, you know, take your brush and you can rub the area gently and you start lifting, almost like mopping up the color, you know, and then just add more water and mop up the color. You're probably, depending on what color is there, you're probably not going to get a completely white area.
Mhm.
You could use the white in the watercolor box if it's just like one little spot. But overall, I mean, that's one of the things that you almost need to keep tabs on when you're working. And you know, there's masking fluids that you can use. But if it's already done, just take water, wet the area, brush it gently, just almost like you're mopping something very delicate, and just try to pick up as much color as you can and then give it a final blot. So
Okay.
that should do, but it's not going to restore it back to white because the watercolor will stain
Yeah.
the paper.
Mhm.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, here you go.
Oh, looks good, Marlene.
Oh,
That looks great. Looks really good.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And another metal that is really fun to do is gold. So we will do that eventually at one point. And also what I want us to do is do some textures in time to time also with pencil or ink pen. So actually next week we're going to do ink pen. So that should be fun. And it's just great. I mean, just practice textures, because it'll take out a lot of frustration when you're painting like a whole scene and you have all these different textures. Your brain will immediately, you know, kind of tell your hand what you need to do. But I think this was good. Again, this is actually, it's not difficult. It's time consuming. and you just have to move very slowly, step away from the work and come back with fresh eyes. Or what I like to do when I'm working is I take a picture of it with my phone, and I take my phone away from where I'm working and then just look at it, because also when you have it on your phone, everything is reduced, so you're actually seeing it compressed, and you're actually seeing it from a distance. So